Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I work for an organization called MadPow. We are based in Boston, Massachusetts, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And we are primarily a digital product and service design consultancy. We work primarily in healthcare and financial services, mostly out of the areas of interest that we have in terms of making people's lives better. And I came into this discipline, into experience design, by way of a journey through film school, and then into computer science, and then into a web design internship. And I always go back to film. I always find myself getting out my camera, wanting to shoot things, storyboarding things up. I make a lot of movies now with my son and daughter. I've always loved film. And I've constantly over the years been looking for ways to take the things that I love about film and I loved about film school and bring that into my work as a designer. So I've thought about things from an information architecture standpoint, from an interaction design standpoint, from an editing standpoint, from a process standpoint. And over the years, I've found a ton of parallels between the work we do as designers and the work that filmmakers do. And so this talk is essentially a culmination of a lot of those parallels. And I'm hoping that as a result of this talk, you'll see some of those parallels as well. And the next time you go and watch a film, you'll think a bit more about what was going through a filmmaker's mind and the decisions they make and how you might be able to use those kinds of processes in the work you do. So the first thing I want to talk about is organization and orchestration. Now, when I'm working in a project, whether it be a new product, a new service, there's a lot of things that I have to organize and orchestrate. I have to pull all these things together to elicit the right experience. I'm working with interface design, content, sound, visual design, interaction design, usability, information architecture, and the list goes on and on and on. All of these things have to work in tandem to create an experience. If these things don't align, if they don't synchronize, if they aren't orchestrated together, then the experience falls apart. And this really isn't any different than what happens in a film. In a film, there are things like actors and dialogue and sound again and scenery and the action and the cinematography and the editing, and all these things have to work together to tell a story. In a film, there is one primary mechanism by which this orchestration takes place. That role is the director. This is a diagram made by Walt Disney and some of his staff to try to illustrate the filmmaking process by way of influence. What roles influence what other roles? And so I'll zoom in here on direction. The director is kind of a misstereotyped role in filmmaking. A lot of us think that the director's in this complete control, that they're doing everything. They're behind the camera, they're manipulating everything and everyone. In some cases, that's absolutely true. But more times than not, all a director is really doing is making sure that that vision is being held to, that that sole vision, that one direction, the place we're going, the story we want to create, everybody is working to make that a reality. The director has the responsibility of finding that vision and keeping it and inspiring everybody in the crew to work towards it, to use their skills to make that story a reality. The director usually isn't behind the camera framing up all the shots, moving the pans, right? They're not constructing the scenes. They're not draping cloths, right? Some will be very hands-on, but most aren't. The best directors do all of that collaboratively. The best directors have an idea of what they want, and they use that to bring other people in. They use that to go out and find a cinematographer that they want to work with. They use that to go out and find actors they want to work with, set designers they want to work with, because they know they can communicate well with them, and they can use that person's talents to make the vision a reality. Right? So I'll ask you this question. In our projects, who's the director? This is a gap that I find in almost every organization I ever walk into. That creative vision, that creative leadership is missing in the project. There are stakeholders, there is a main point of contact, there is a project manager, there might be a product owner. But they're not very good at having vision and inspiring people towards vision. They're not good at constructing vision with others. That role is missing. Oftentimes when I ask this question, the answer I get back is, oh, well, it should be the product owner. Or maybe it should be the UX director on that project. That would be awesome if it really worked. But more often than not, a product owner doesn't really understand all the pieces that need to pull together to make that vision a reality. And oftentimes a UX director or a design director isn't put in a position where they have that much leadership capability, that much influence. And so this is a gap that I think organizations need to work to fill. Where is the creative leadership? Where is the director? When we can start to identify that and put that person in a place where they can inspire people, where they can bring people together to collaborate, then a lot of the design problems that we run into, the process problems, the collaboration problems that we run into, they're all going to melt away. So let's assume that we do have a director, that our project is going really well. We've got somebody, they've got a vision, they worked with the whole group to create that vision, so we all kind of feel a sense of ownership. We all know what our roles are and how we're going to get to that vision. What's that process look like? In filmmaking, it's basically screenplay and script, moving on to some storyboards and some direction, raw footage, editing, the final piece. And now, it flows this way. This is the basic evolution, but it is not nearly this linear, right? There are rewrites, and there are reshoots, and there's back and forth. Things change, right? But this looks very familiar. This is the software design process or the web design process. We start with some basic task flows, right? Then we have sketches and wireframes. We pull together our content. Then we have prototyping and visual design, right? And we get into our final piece, the thing we're actually going to deliver and launch. And again, not nearly this linear. Things go back and forth. So we've created lots of tools that help us move through this process. And so have filmmakers. In filmmakers, one of the key tools is the storyboard. And storyboards have actually been used for a long time in software design. Whereas this is a storyboard for film, though, what I find when I go into companies and ask for their storyboards for their software, I get things like this. There's a screen. And you click something, and there's another screen. And then you click something, and there's another screen. And then you click something, and there's another screen. This misses something. This misses something that you can't quite see here so much, but you can feel it when you're looking at this. It misses the emotion. It misses all the stuff that's happening in the user's brain. What's the user thinking? What are they feeling? And this is something that I'm really interested in, that I really like about experience design. I like the fact that experience design, when it's really paid attention to, allows us to consider emotion and feelings as material to the designs that we are trying to create. It's not just about cognition and utility. Those things are extremely important, but so are emotions. So how do we make sure that we keep emotions and feelings in the forefront of the design process? How do we make sure we keep those things in mind as we go through that whole design process? How do we use emotions so that they have great impact on our users without overusing them and making people sick? One of the tools that we like to use at MadPow are called scenarios. Scenarios are stories. They're basically the narrative form of a task flow. They give context to a sequence of actions. They can also, and where a task flow cannot, they can start to include what someone is feeling, what someone is thinking. Scenarios are essentially scenes. And so in our scenarios, we write these out. We make sure that we are noting emotions. Emotions that we know people are having going into certain situations. Emotions that we know we want to try to elicit in people. And we take those into account as we're crafting designs to facilitate these scenarios. Another really great tool that we have for this are comics, right? In a comic, you can basically take those screenshots out of your storyboards and pair them up with a pictorial representation of the user and give them thought bubbles and speech bubbles and talk about what's going on in their brains, through their emotions. These things are really great, and we've had a lot of success with them, but we've also run into a big problem with them, and that's in their longevity. These things are great at the beginning of the design process. These things can look really great to stakeholders. But what we found over time is that as we get deeper and deeper into the process, as we start to get into development and we're pulling things together and we're working in code, these things kind of fall away. People stop looking at them. People stop thinking about them. Your developers are not looking at your comics or your scenarios. And your developers are absolutely part of your design process. And so that's a big problem. So we wanted to try to find other tools, other things that we might be able to do to keep emotions in people's minds as we were creating things. And one of the tools we came upon comes from film. It's called a beat sheet. A beat sheet is essentially a scene-by-scene outline that contains the main plot point in any scene, the main actions in that scene, and the best beat sheets also note the effect that is intended for that audience at that point in time. So you'll see things like big action beat or big comedic beat. Right? This is all these things that appear in the beat sheet. These are the primary important points at any given time in a scene. Everything else that's happening in that scene is secondary and or in support of what is here. Now, these are primarily used as a screenwriting tool. Right? A screenwriter would go through and create a beat sheet to outline exactly what they want people to be feeling at any point in time. And then they write the actual screenplay, and then they read through it. And they think back, well, is this really doing that? Does it feel slow here? It's not supposed to feel slow. It's an action scene. Right? So it's used as a check tool. But I had an instructor, Jack Beck, in film school, who actually showed us that this was a great tool for a crew and a cast. Because this told everybody what was most important at any given time when they were shooting. Right? So this short little synopsis really helped bring people together and make sure that we were considering what was most important, what people are supposed to be feeling, what we're supposed to be trying to elicit in the audience watching us. And so can we use beat sheets in design? Well, obviously, because it's a part of this presentation, we can. Beat sheets are an outline. What else do we have that is essentially an outline? Our task flows. So the very first time we came upon this idea, all we did was we took a task flow and we annotated it. Within each step, right underneath, we would not mark down what we thought the user was coming into this step, feeling and thinking, and what we wanted them to feel and think, what we wanted to do with that emotion. This particular task flow, this is the first one we ever did. This was a project where we were taking the process of making a 401k hardship withdrawal and putting that process online. Now, you don't make a 401k hardship withdrawal unless your life has gone to shit. You are in a very bad place. And making these hardship withdrawals has huge implications for the rest of your life and your retirement thereafter. There's a lot going on in your brain when you have to make a decision as to whether or not you're going to do this and for how much. There are big ramifications here. And so this was a very emotionally charged scenario. And we wanted to make sure we took that into account. The original ask of us was just make it a wizard. Really easy. But when we talked to users about that, and we talked about the questions that they were asking themselves, we realized a wizard may make it too easy. People might get through a wizard and actually find out that they've hurt themselves because they've made choices that are in the long run very bad for them. So we wanted something that had more character, more emotion to it, that was cognizant of the emotions people had and actually did something with them. And this was really cool. Again, this was the first time we had ever tried this. And what we found as we started to get into some of the prototyping and development, when I first showed this to the team, I had visual designers and content writers right away tell me, okay, we've already made some decisions on the colors we're going to use and the tone of voice we're going to use. And that was cool. But what really got me was that I had a developer, one of the prototype developers, come up to me and ask me if the functionality he was developing would actually elicit these emotions. Now, he was challenging me. He was trying to call bullshit. And I was okay with that, because what that meant to me was I had him thinking about emotion. That was part of his thought process. And that was awesome. And we've had a lot of success with these. We've actually turned this into an early design activity that we do with stakeholders and with teams. Let's map the scenario. Let's talk about this task flow that you guys have, and let's think about the emotions. What are people thinking as they come in? What do we want them to think and feel? And we do this collaboratively. And that helps build this shared understanding, this shared sense of ownership. So beat sheets are essentially annotated task flows. The emotional state of the user and the emotional goals of the system. For every step in an interaction, in a scenario, what is it that they're thinking and feeling, and what do you want to do with that? Storytelling is a huge buzzword right now in the work we do. Everybody's up on storytelling. Storytelling is awesome. But I think that there are some misunderstandings about what storytelling actually is. Everything I've talked about up until this point, all those beat sheets and things like that, that is essentially story, not storytelling. Stories are the events, the sequence of events. Storytelling is the structure and mechanisms you use to communicate those events to another person. Storytelling is about the choices you make when you're conveying information. Right? I can get really loud. I can get really quiet. I can move around really quickly. I could stand very still. Those kinds of choices that I make as I'm talking to you right now are aspects of storytelling. Whether or not I light a shot one way or another way in a scene are aspects of storytelling. That's what it really is. And those things are still very important to the work we do. Let's talk about one aspect of those. Let's talk about pacing. Pacing is essentially the speed of something, how fast or slow something feels. Let's look at an example. This is Goodfellas. This is Ray Liotta. This is probably a little over halfway into the movie, I think. He is leaving his house. He's been doing quite a bit of drugs at this point. He's started to get paranoid.
I was going to be busy all day. I had to drop off some guns at Jimmy's to match some silencers he had gotten. I had to pick up my brother at the hospital and drive him back to the house for dinner that night. And then I had to pick up some new Pittsburgh stuff for Lowe's to fly down to some customers I had near Atlanta.
This is actually the start of a much longer sequence. In this sequence, Scorsese goes back and forth between longer and shorter shots of Ray driving and looking up and either seeing the helicopter or not seeing the helicopter. And then there are points where he gets out of the car, he goes, I believe, to his mother's house, and there's a dinner scene, and he's helping cook spaghetti sauce. And it's very, very long shots. Nothing is really happening in those shots. And it's back out in the car, and the shots get closer and closer and closer. What Scorsese is trying to really mimic here is Ray's essentially paranoia. And the pacing changes. You're getting no information in these really long shots, or you're getting information very quickly. Is the helicopter there? Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Oh, yes, it is. Yeah, it is. And then eventually, Ray actually gets picked up by narcs. So Scorsese changes the rate at which he's giving you information. He plays with that through shot length. How do we control the pace in a scenario, in a series of interactions? Very common example. This is Amazon. This is a product page in Amazon. There is a shit ton of information on this page, and it keeps going and going and going. We dump a whole heck of a lot of information on the user at once. Very quick initial burst, but then you're there with a lot. Nothing new is really coming at you. Now contrast this to the checkout process. It's actually gotten shorter than this. This was back when it was 4 screens. I think now the regular checkout process might be 3 screens, and then there's always the 1 click, right? Very fast. Ask a question, get an answer. Ask a question, get an answer. Ask a question, get an answer. The thing about this is that our pacing always tends to look like this. Very flat. You get you through one thing, and then you're doing a new task or a new subtask, and that has kind of a flat pace to it. And then you do something else, and that has a flat pace to it. And I'm curious to see, can we get to pacing that is more like filmmaking? Can we get to pacing that has peaks and valleys? And I know of some teams that are experimenting with this. I know of teams that are creating forms that will start by asking a few questions, over a couple screens, and then as you get deeper into the process, there's more questions all at once to try to ease you in to this longer process. But there's another kind of interesting thing I think happening. And it has to do with parallax scrolling. Now, if nobody's eyes rolled when I said that, I would actually be shocked. Because 99% of parallax scrolling on the web today is complete bullshit. It's nothing more than eye candy. It does nothing to further the story. It's cool. We can move things based on how you move the scroll bar. Awesome. But does it help tell the story? There are a couple examples where it does. I want to show you one. This is my favorite one. It's called virtual water. And I've got a screen capture here. I'm trying to scroll at a very consistent pace. Here I go. What this is trying to illustrate to you is how much water you consume on any given day. It starts here. Get to the bottom there. More stuff comes in. Yeah, it's still trying to be very consistent. More information. Get down here. There's some more animations coming in. And this is done by Angela Morelli. And I don't know Angela. I've never gotten a chance to talk to her. I would love to. But something stood out to me from this as an animator. Angela had to. There's no way this is coincidence. Angela had to give thought to how fast certain transitions would be relative to how quickly you are moving the scroll. So certain things happen faster than others. Certain things stay on screen longer than others. That is pacing. And so to me, techniques like this are very interesting when we think about storytelling in the digital space. Let's talk about another aspect. Let's talk about mise-en-scène. Mise-en-scène, roughly translated, means everything that a filmmaker has to help tell a story that isn't dialogue. It's everything else that's happening. It's the way the actors are moving. It's the way the sets are dressed. It's the way scenes are lit. It's all those aspects. Mise-en-scène is a very powerful thing. Some people, some directors, are known completely for their mise-en-scène because they use the same exact one in every single film they make. So is there a mise-en-scène when we're creating digital products and websites? Abso-friggin-lutely. Right? We have so many design principles. We can shit Gestalt principles. All these things we have to help us make sense of information, help us communicate information to someone without actually spelling it out in words. A lot of what we have, though, comes from static media. A lot of web design was born out of graphic design. And that's all well and good. There's a lot of really great information and knowledge there. And then digital comes along, and now we can interact with stuff. And so then we add interaction, human-computer interaction, principles of interaction. Really great. Lots of really good stuff there too. But we're in a place now where technology allows for things to respond in real time, for us to animate things. Things can move. Things are fast. It's almost lifelike. Now we have cinematic media. And that intersection is where we are now. So if we want to continue to move forward as designers, we have to pay attention to cinematic media and learn from it. Learn its principles. Learn its ideas, its techniques, and see what can we adapt. What can we use? One of those things is motion. Motion has meaning. The way something moves directly affects how you interpret it. We've already been working with this. We've talked a lot about transitions. There's a really great book called Designing Web Interfaces. Bill Scott and Teresa Neal wrote it. And they have a whole chapter on transitions and the value of transitions, the power that they have. Transitions allow us to show relationships between elements, right? Things can bump into each other. I can click on something and it can open up to show a menu of options underneath. So I know that those options belong in that parent, right? I can click on something and something happens to the screen. Feedback, relationships. They allow us to show cause and effect. Right? They allow us to direct attention. We are wired to pay attention to motion. When something moves, we need to look at it, understand it, interpret its motion, friend or foe. What are we going to do? Something or nothing. That's just how we're wired. So when we see something move, especially if it's not something we expected to move, we're going to pay attention to it. And they can support brand personality. Great example, the Genie effect. It's all those things. Cause and effect, relationships, directing attention, brand personality. When we're adding motion to design elements, though, we need to make sure that we're thinking about them as if they're physical objects. It's not as simple as just making something move. You can make something move and have it make no sense whatsoever to the viewer. Adam Lissiger is a filmmaker. He works a lot in promotional films or videos. If you've ever seen, you guys remember when Coin came out? He did the video for that, where it's the card that basically has all your cards in it. It flips it open, things like that. Adam found in one project where he was, I can't remember what device it was, but basically he's waving it around using it, and it's got this number and these words that are following it. And those numbers and words move with his hand as if they're organically connected. Not statically connected, not robotic, organically. It was a very simple After Effects trick. It took him like 2 minutes to do. When that video hit, all of the positive feedback he got was around those words, moving around, because it felt real to people. And he quickly realized that when I can take something that isn't real, but make it move like it is, that does things for people. That's delightful. So how do we do that? How do we make the unreal move as if it is real? We don't have to think about it at all. A couple of guys already did that for us. Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson are two of the 9 old men of Disney. The 9 old men are the original animators. These are the guys that made Snow White, the first feature-length animated movie. It changed animation forever. Prior to that, it was awesome that cartoons could move. Characters could move and do things that looked kind of human-like. But there had never been something that was so lifelike and so not real life on screen. The way they got to that is they came up with these 12 principles of animation. These 12 rules that they had to follow to make sure that their drawings moved lifelike. And all of these things are very relevant to the work we do. I'll give you some examples. Squash and stretch, arcs, easing, right? When a ball bounces, it doesn't always retain that perfect spherical shape. It changes. When things move, they change shape. There's elasticity there, right? Follow through and secondary or overlapping action. If I'm standing here and I throw a ball, I'm probably not throwing it like this, right? I have a wind up and a step through. And after I let go of the ball, my arm keeps going, my body keeps going. These kinds of things and considerations are important when we're moving things on a screen. This happened when, or this can be seen in BlackBerry versus iPhone. When BlackBerry released its scrolling, very robotic. You hit the top, everything stopped. iPhone, you scroll to the top, things bounce. Right? Physical objects move in physical spaces too. I'll give you this example. This was Flickr. This is about 2 versions ago. I'm going to click into my stream here, and I'm swiping, next photo. I'm swiping that way. Now watch what happens when I swipe this way. I got the last photo. Now, cognitively, at first, that doesn't feel weird, right? Swipe in one direction, I go forward, swipe in the other direction, I go back. But this felt weird to me, and it felt weird to a couple of my coworkers. So we went out, we shared it with other people, and tried to get their reaction. And everybody got it. Everybody understood the interaction. But we did get a lot of, there's something weird about that. So we looked at it. The metaphor that they're using here is essentially a card stack. Now think about a card stack. If I have a stack of cards and I swipe in one direction, I'm going to see the next card. If I swipe in the other direction, does that card magically come off the floor and end up here? No, it doesn't. So we start to interpret not just the object that we're interacting with, but the space around it based on how things are moved and how things are being interacted with. Now, Flickr has gotten rid of this, and actually, within the same app, they actually fixed that. So if you tap one more time into the stream, you're still in the stream, and you're still interacting by swiping, but now you're in a carousel. So instead of swiping left or right and throwing things off, the entire frame is shifting with you, and it makes complete sense. So you have to remember that anything that appears or happens on screen can either further the story or recontextualize it. It can cause people to have to rethink their understanding. Motion has more meaning, too. Early filmmakers, they didn't have sound. They had title cards, but those were seen as a crutch. That's not what people were there for. They weren't there to tell stories with words. They were there to tell stories with moving pictures. So they had to find other patterns, other things they could use to communicate information to an audience. One thing they found was that the direction in which things moved actually influenced how people thought of them. My favorite is the bad guy enters from the right. This is not completely 100% all the time true. But what they found is that something that moves within a scene from right to left feels awkward, out of place, antagonistic compared to left to right. Why? Well, most of us read left to right, right? Timelines are drawn left to right. Left to right is a common reoccurring pattern that we see over and over and over again. And when we see something that goes counter to that, it feels weird. So filmmakers use that. Oh, there we go. This is Road to Perdition. Tom Hanks, mob enforcer, quits the mob because he wants to go after his former mob boss who had killed his wife and his other son. This is Tom's remaining son. They're on the run trying to follow this mob boss. He's driving in right to left. The town is walking left to right. You get the feeling that he is out of place. Strangers on a train. Classic opening scene. Two sets of shoes. Antagonist and protagonist. Cut back and forth between the shoes, walking, one in each direction. You don't see their faces. They eventually meet on the train. And you already know which one's the bad guy and which one's the good guy just because of the direction they were walking. You already innately feel that. Right? And motion goes even further. Top to bottom. Right? Anticipation. Inevitability. Right? Because we have gravity. Things fall. When things go against that and go from bottom to top, feels otherworldly, unnatural, right? So these kinds of things are notions and patterns that early filmmakers saw and would use to great extent in their films to communicate with an audience. And so when we think about transitions and animations in our work, we can also add character to our design elements. We can think about the way individual objects move and how that motion will affect the way someone interprets them, whether that particular element might be antagonistic, right? What if error messages came in from one direction and success messages came in from the other? I don't know. Just spitballing. Motion is an additive design treatment, though, right? Just because a bad guy comes in from the left-hand side of the screen does not mean that he is suddenly not the bad guy anymore. Right? So we have to make sure that we are not wholly reliant on these kinds of things. So how do we develop this practice? If we want to play with these things, how do we actually do that? Right? In film, you have playbacks, you have test footage. What do we have? We have prototypes. We have tools like this. The problem with tools like this is almost all of them, actually no, all of these, and almost everyone I've ever seen, suck at motion. They're very limited in what they can do. And so I'm going to say something, and I don't want it to sound bad, but the only way to really get at this and learn what we're doing and develop these patterns is to work in code. And I'm not going to argue that all designers must code, but I am going to tell you that if you don't code, you better damn well find someone who can and learn to work really well with them. And you should be doing that anyway, because developers are awesome. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the camera, because the camera is a really interesting component in film. Control of the camera means control of the eye. This is how you manipulate the audience and where they are looking. My favorite technique for this is rack focus. Rack focus is little to no camera movement, right? No complex action within the scene, within the shot. And what happens is the camera shifts its focus from one element in the scene to another. Graduate. That's Ben. He's talking to his girlfriend. About to tell her he's been sleeping with her mom. That's her mom in the background. She's fuzzy. Elaine's in focus. Oh, mom's in focus. Slowly bring the focus back to Elaine. We have her oh shit moment with her. Spider-Man. 15 spiders.
There's 14.
14 spiders. What?
One's missing.
Where's the other spider? Don't forget about that spider. It's really important. Right? So rack focus is this technique that filmmakers have to direct attention from one thing to another to kind of enhance the story, enhance a certain point of information. I don't know. Can we use things like rack focus or other camera-related techniques in our design? I don't know. We might be able to. It's a question I have for you guys, which brings me to my parting thought. If we want to do this, if we want to look at cinema, we want to learn from cinema, we want to figure out what we can use and what we can't, it's going to take experimentation. And experimentation in our world is really hard, because what client do you have that wants to hear that you're going to experiment with the thing they hired you to create? Probably none of them. But we have to find ways. We have to find ways to work it in. And not just to work it in, but to actually measure it and monitor it and understand, is what we just did really working to create the effect we want or not working? Right? And it's going to be hard, but I think we can do it. If anybody's interested in learning about this more, these are some really great books that I would highly recommend. There's lots of other people thinking about this too. Here's some really great articles. Self-promotion. My company runs an annual conference called Healthcare Experience Refactored. It's coming up in April. If anybody's interested, if you work in the healthcare space, I'd highly recommend that you come join us. We currently have early bird rates available. And that's it for me. Thank you guys very much. I think we're like right at time.